Alrighty, so welcome to From Exhausted to Empowered. As many of you will know already, my name's Tara. I am AKA the Gentle Sleep Specialist. I work with little ones sleep with families all around the world. We resolve sleep problems, whether or not it's for toddlers, newborns, babies, all the jam. We're actually working with a lot of 7, 8-year-olds at the moment, which just brings me so much joy because often we can essentially avoid medicating and things like that. So, yeah, tonight, basically, first off, I'm just going to cover some day structuring that I think is really important to sort of take note on. Then we're going to get into why we end up in these cycles of this, this either constant waking, catnapping, how to, navigate that, how we can teach our little ones that they don't need to consistently wake all the time, and why it happens and all those things. So, firstly, talking about day structure, I sort of want to talk about the early part of little ones' days. They tend to be more tired in the early part of their day. So, we tend to find that little ones, before their first nap, tend to need less awake time. And then as the day goes on, they tend to require a little bit more awake time. Now, a lot of people have issues with the very last nap of the day. And that is often because they actually need a bit more awake time before the last nap. Now, there is a few little ones who might need less, but often it's actually that they need more. And what often will get us, like screw us, is essentially that we're kind of starting to see that they're becoming more irritable as the day goes on. They seem tired, they seem niggly, and then we put them down and they just lose it and won't have that later nap. That is often still a sign that they needed more awake time, and or as little ones get older and the naps become more fragile and the later naps of the day start to drop off, essentially what happens is that they might only take those naps in the car, pram, or carrier. So what we know, for example, for toddlers, that once they start to hit 2 years, 3 months and above, it's actually really common that they won't take their nap in the cot or in their bed anymore, and they'll only have it on the go. Well, the same thing kind of happens for our little ones who, for example, when it's that later nap of the day. So it's really, really important to note that you absolutely can offer that later nap in the car, pram, or carry. If it's easier, you can trial more awake time, and you can use lesser awake time before the first naps and then more awake time before the later naps. What we tend to find is that for little ones who are around sort of, let's just say, 9 months and under, the first two naps of the day, we kind of want to encourage those to be your better naps, your longer naps of the day, so more than an hour. Now, you don't have to have a capped first nap, a 2 hour middle, and then, that sort of thing. People make certain things really famous, and like you have to stay with them. You don't have to have a babe who wakes at 7 and goes at 7. You might have a little one who goes to bed at 6 and wakes at 5:30, and that's beautiful, or goes to bed at 6 and, wakes up at 7, like no worries, or vice versa. What we're sort of aiming for overnight is between that 10 and a half and sort of 12 and a half hour or 12 hours, right? Is the aim. Some might do 12 and a half. Lucky them. But anywhere in between that time, then your first two naps of the day, we want to start to see those get more than the single cycle. So the single cycle sleep is usually between 30 to 50 minutes long. And we want to sort of see two of those consolidated for nap 1 and 2. Unless your little one is coming above 9 month mark, it's really quite common at that point that they might need a little bit less sleep overall. And so a lengthy first nap and a shorter second nap, or a short first nap and a lengthy second nap, tends to happen. Now, the reason why I am just going to get my pen and paper, as I'm sure some of you guys have seen before and heard about my drawing. I was meant to grab a pen. I will grab one in a second. But what we want to do when it comes to the naps, what's really, really important is that we make sure that the naps don't suddenly all drop off, and then we've got this huge awake time before bed, right? So the reason why I don't tend to cap nap 1, and I don't tend to put all the focus on the midday or the second nap, is because the fifth nap drops off, the fourth nap drops off, the third nap drops off, the second nap drops off, right? And what we tend to find is that then that first nap shuffles out to become the one nap of the day. Now, just give me 1 second, guys, because I'm going to just grab a pen. Honestly, I have a million kids here every day, and you would think that I've got a texter, but unfortunately it's yellow, of course. The one that I could find is the one that people won't be able to see. So what happens is that the naps will essentially go over across the day, and then they'll drop off. So this is the best way to explain it. So you have your first, second, third, and it doesn't matter. You could have 4 naps, whatever your little one is on, even if you've got your 1 nap of the day. So if your little one's just on 1 nap of the day, what happens is when this last nap drops off, we want to make sure that then there's not this huge stretch before bedtime, right? Because that's when little ones tend to be more tired and really not cope. Now, they might cope with not having the third nap, for example, or not having their 1 nap of the day for a day or two. But what you might find is that after a few days, they start to wake earlier. And it's kind of a vicious cycle. So what we want to do is we want to make sure our first nap kind of pulls out a little bit and heads closer to here. And then our second nap pulls out a little bit, heads closer to here. And then we've still got a bit of a gap, but we're sort of buffering that bedtime a little bit more. And same with if our little one was to drop to 1 nap a day. Initially, that 1 nap might be falling here, or the first nap might be falling here at about 10 o'clock or 9:30, 10, if they're on the 2 naps. When the second nap drops off, we want to make sure that this first nap of the day moves just a little bit closer to 11 or 11:30, right? We want to make sure that it's not sort of all happening too early, and then there's this huge span before bedtime. Now, what you also might find with your day structuring is that your toddler might be showing signs that they don't need the nap. And what I would recommend is firstly checking, and guys, this is really, really important. If you ever feel that your little one is essentially fighting their naps, looking like they're ready to drop, that sort of thing, remember you always want to keep naps as long as you can. It's really important. And the way that we keep them as long as we can, and the reason why we do is so that we nurture really good sleep and not overtiredness and nighttime sleep. Now, if you're having split nights in the night and your little one is way too old to be having the amount of sleep they're having during the day, that's different. So if you've got a little one waking up between 2 to 4 a.m., they're impossible to resettle, that sort of thing, and you've checked everything else and they're having quite a substantial amount of day sleep, quite an abnormal, substantial amount of day sleep for their age, of course, we can start capping and chopping and all of that sort of thing. But what I want you to do before you ever think of dropping naps, especially if your little one is on the younger side, is firstly, sleep habits matter. So we're going to get into that in a little bit. Guys, this is Jake. I didn't even really click. He's going to be on the webinar. How cute. So sleep habits really matter, first things first. The next thing is that we want to make sure that, so basically, when I say sleep habits really matter, what I mean is that if you have to put your little one off to sleep, if you're rocking, feeding, doing those things to get your little one to sleep, sleep is very fragile, right? And what tends to happen is that these babes who don't have the best sleep habits, who are waking up a lot in the nighttime, who are hit and misses sleep, what tends to happen is that over time, basically, they drop their naps too soon. They're more prone to more night waking, and what we want to do is instead work on some of those habits, which we're going to get to. We also want to make sure our little ones have had plenty of opportunity to expend energy. Really important in this day and age. Screen times ruin sleep, and they often essentially or not getting enough expenditure, not getting enough opportunity, even for our little bubs to roll around on the mat if they're in the pram the whole time, that sort of thing. Of course, if you can't avoid it, and it's, just one of those things, like, of course, but where you can, trying to offer them flat mat time to play around, to hang about, that sort of thing is really, really important. So we want to think of that energy expenditure for our babes. We want them to have exposure to safe exposure to the early sunlight, the later, evening light, the ocean, whatever you can in terms of nature, being outside, that sort of thing, because it's those things that actually really consolidate and really nurture the circadian rhythm, their expenditure of energy, the need for sleep, all that sort of jazz, right? I don't know if you guys know, but have you ever noticed when you go camping, you are so freaking tired? It's like 8 o'clock and you could go to bed at home because we've got all the fake lights, we've got the TVs, we've got all the things going, and we're not outside, we're not exposed to that sun going down, the circadian rhythm of morning when the sun's coming up through the tent, all those things. Those things are what nurture really, really good sleep as well. So the more that we can get our babes like out and about, obviously safely, but you know what I'm saying, like just that exposure, making sure they're getting opportunity to expend their energy is really important before we think about dropping naps. Also really important is to make sure that we add a little bit more awake time if we haven't. And again, we could use those other measures. Then when you bought your little one enough time in terms of age and they're really ready to transition, the transitions are going to be so much easier. Another thing, really important, when your little ones first drop their naps, if your little ones have been having 3 naps or they've had their 1 nap in the day, and it means bedtime's falling closer to like your 7:30, 7:30s. When we suddenly drop this nap or we drop their nap of the day, whichever one it is, fourth nap goes, whichever one, suddenly we've not only got a bit of a span, but then we think, okay, wow, like they've woken up at 2. They're usually, they're now having 4 hours awake time before they even hit 6 o'clock. You need to trial 2 things. One, try and put them down at the 6 o'clock mark one time, even 5:45. If your babe loses it, so this is when they've dropped a nap, they've suddenly dropped from 3 to 2 naps, or they've dropped their 2 to 1 nap, and you try putting them down earlier because, that makes sense that they're more tired. If they lose it, that's because they think you're putting them down for another nap because it's too early and they've become really accustomed to a later bedtime. So what you need to do is put them down a little bit later for a while, even, just over a few days or a week, and then slowly bring bedtime forward. That is something that really matters. So make sure you guys take note on that. Same with if they wake up super early in the morning, they're more likely to want to go to bed a little bit sooner. If they wake up super late or they've had an extra long nap, you might be able to add a little bit more awake time essentially. So these are some of the day things that I want you guys, the day structuring, those sorts of things that I want you guys to keep an eye on. Your little ones might also, especially when dropping from 2 to 1 nap or 1 to no naps, your little ones may also dice. They will sometimes have 3 or 2 naps. 3 naps, sometimes have 2. If they're dropping from 2 to 1, they'll sometimes have their 2 nap day. They'll other times just have their 1, or sometimes they'll have their 1 nap, and then other times they'll have none. And it's very, very normal that they'll dice between which naps they're dropping. So the 1 to 0 or the 2 to 1, whichever ones they're up to. That's very normal. And we want to allow them to do that pretty much for as long as they need to. If we keep finding that we get screwed in that afternoon time, and you might need to hold a bit of a firmer structure on no nap, for example, especially if you've got a toddler who they're really tired by 4:30 or whatever, so we keep offering the nap, but then the bedtimes are just blowing out, they're just becoming really horrible, then of course basically then you might go, no, we're not going to keep dicing between having a nap because the nap days are just horrible. So then you can make that decision. The other thing that I want to talk about, and this is the next sort of thing I want to move into, which is really, really important, is this wonderful thing called sleep pressure. Now, a lot of you guys who followed me will know exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about sleep pressure, but I would be doing you an injustice, or whoever doesn't follow me, an injustice, if I didn't talk about this. Lucky me, I found a pink pen this time. Now, the way that I want you guys to structure your days typically, especially if you've got a little one that's on milk. Now, if your little ones are having solids first, then milk because they're above 9 or 10 months of age, firstly, no worries. Secondly, remember that's only if your little ones are having not very good with solids, which, by the way, I have a lot of people whose solid intake transforms when their little ones start sleeping well and aren't feeding all night and aren't irritable and don't just, it is incredible. So if you've got a really fussy eater as well, begin with sleep, especially if they're not a great sleeper as well. It just honestly makes such a big difference a lot of the time. No, I can't promise, but it's amazing. So what we want to focus on, and the reason is, and I want to just touch on this quickly, the reasons that I find is, firstly, little ones who don't sleep well are more likely to be acopic during the day. They want to just be on, mum, they don't sort of cope so well. They cope for a little while and they seem quite happy, but they're just a bit fussy on solids, that sort of thing. Firstly, if they're feeding a lot at nighttime, they basically lose their appetite. And during the day, they end up becoming quite particular feeders where they'll only have sweet things. They'll only have the yogurts. They'll only have the fruit pouches, things like that, because they're eating just for taste. They're not eating because they need a balance, because they've got an appetite. We want our babes to eat because they've got an appetite, because then we can have that more broad, variety of foods and things like that. The other thing is like I said, they become a bit more grizzly. They can't focus. It takes a lot for a little one to sit down and want to eat and focus on that. So that attention. And also when babes are really tired, they just want to be on and off milk feeds because that's where they're getting their rest as well. Which brings me to the way that I would advise that you guys run your structuring is that when your little ones wake, you wait about 10 minutes and then you offer a feed and then you have play, 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 and then they go down for their sleep, right? Now, this is for 3 months and above, right? This isn't for newborns. Now, what can happen, and if you guys want to do solids first, because you already are, great, you can do solids, but you need to make sure your feed isn't too close to bedtime. So if you do like solids here when like they've woken up, then we do solids here after however long feels comfortable, then you could offer milk, but then they need to have at least half an hour, preferably 40 minutes, play before bedtime, before naps even, right? So my normal structuring would be wake up, wait 10 minutes, feed, play, sleep. After the last nap of the day, you can do a feed, then you can do another feed 45 minutes before bed. Or if your little one doesn't have much long awake time, I wouldn't feed when they first wake from last nap. I would be more inclined to only offer the feed about here, so 45 minutes before bedtime. That's a babe who's having one feed in their awake period. Now, what about a babe who's on and off feeds in their awake time? This is where we start to lose sleep pressure. So this circle here used to just be the one feed, and then they had all this time to build up their sleep pressure and expend energy. Unfortunately, when your little ones are on and off feeds a lot in their awake period, which when they're tired, they're more likely to not only be distracted feeders, but what people would be, call as fussy feeders, and they just won't feed. And then I don't know what to do because they haven't had a good feed. This is what we work with every day, every single day. So if your little one is essentially quite, they're essentially taking the opportunity to have, more feeds and on and off the breast, look how much less time, especially before bedtime or nap, that they have to expend energy and build up that sleep pressure. You don't build sleep pressure by making them really overtired. Making babies overtired essentially just has such a backlash effect. Like they essentially have more cortisol, their stress hormones are higher, which actually makes it harder for them to get into a deeper sleep, which really impacts their naps and their early morning waking, all the things, right? So what instead that's one thing when they're having multiple feeds. Now, the other way that this can happen, there's two other ways, but I'm going to do this one first, is if you go, my babe's not a good feeder, they take a long time to have a feed. And you can see how much that's eaten out of their sleep pressure. This is it. That's all they've got left. So lengthier feeds for what their age actually needs is another way that they lose sleep pressure. Or they have this banger right here. They have a feed before they go down. And then we're like, they're fighting sleep. Or they keep having this feed every time they're about to go to sleep. And guess what? The brain goes 1 + 1 =. What I want you guys to feel empowered with, what I want you guys to know is like the understanding behind things, the sleep pressure, the structuring of the day, what little things matter, and not just that, but also what makes sleep good, what makes it bad, what is it about these patterns and these habits? Why do some babies sleep well, some babies, need some more guidance? It is so crazy for us to think that all babies are just born to know and do the whole sleep thing and all that jazz. In fact, a lot of babies who are co-sleeping, right? So when we hear the other side of the story, people are like, you shouldn't do any sort of sleep patterns. We have people who are co-sleeping who have to stand up 6 times a night to rock. Like they have to stand up and jiggle, even though the babe's asleep next to them. Or the babe's on and off the breast all night, won't eat properly during the daytime, very irritable. Mum's exhausted. Mum's just wants to cut breastfeeding, like just done with it because they're just like, oh, I'm so over having this little bub like on me all the time. And so what we want to recognize, and this takes me into the next thing, is why sleep pressure is important, because we want them to build up the appetite to go down. If your little ones don't have that appetite, it makes making sleep changes really freaking difficult, really hard because they've lost that sleep pressure. Now, a lot of people, when I see them on Facebook groups and things like that, they will basically just be like, right, I'm trying this method and go gung ho on this method. It's like a diet, right? Like I found that this week's diet. And then they just put it in place as if it is just I'll just put you here. You go there. You go on the settle path. We must factor sleep in as a whole. Sleep is not just what happens on that settle. Sleep is not just what happens at 10 o'clock and not 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning, not 4. Sleep is essentially a whole range of things. They've had their feet, they've been awake on their feet, they've built up the sleep pressure to learn to sleep, to actually be able to fall asleep. We've set up their feeds for them to win, essentially, for them to have better settles, less crying, all of that. And a lot of people don't counter, this. And you go to a sleep school, you walk in, they put the baby into a strange cot, and then they say, right, let's try a settle. And I'm like, do you even know, like, did that baby get sleepy on the feed half an hour beforehand? Like, these things really matter because if you're going to make changes to sleep, firstly, you must begin at the beginning of the nighttime. The next thing is we want to focus on their sleep pressure. The next thing is we want to focus on good feeds, effective feeds, but not feeds that tend to draw out and drag on. And if that is the case, that is when you're more inclined. I would be inclined to offer. If they don't have the best feed, offer again 10 minutes later. And then if not, still play and move on with the settle anyway. They will get much better at having effective feeds. If you feel really uncomfortable or not confident with that, that's when essentially we can work together to make sure that you feel like, you've got that tick of approval to be able to move forward and to know that it is going to settle and to bounce back on things. So what we would then want to look at is, as I mentioned before, making changes from the beginning of the night. Why does sleep go off? Like, why do some people need that sleep support and others not so much? Now, really importantly, the main thing is when it comes to sleep, it's not about feeds, as in I very rarely work with cold babies, hungry babies, um, teething babies, and those things. Like, it is so rare that the real reason that little ones can't sleep well is because they're teething in that moment, or they're going through a bit of a regression, or they aren't having the best feeds. Now, of course, those things are important, and especially the feed side of things, and we would always check that. But if you feel like your little one's gaining enough weight or staying on their, rhythm where they're up to, they are getting, good enough feeds and that sort of thing, it's very rarely that the constant waking is to actually feed. And in fact, it just turns them into snack feeders during the day more so. So what we want to do is look at the way that little ones fall asleep is what matters to how they not only then rely on going to sleep, but what they use to get back to sleep. So if you think of little ones, some little ones, their prop is dummies. For some little ones, their prop has been the car seat. For some little ones, it's rocking. For some little ones, it's feeding. For some little ones, it's a concoction of all of them. And what it is that our babes are born to connect, of course. So we really encourage and nurture that fourth trimester. But from there, what they're also doing is they're picking up on patterns, and they are born to do that. So people who say like they can't learn bad habits, I hate that, because you're right, like bad habits, like that's not a thing. Some babes will feed to sleep and they'll sleep beautifully. Some babes will use a dummy and I will never hear from them. Great. Like I don't have a problem with any of that if everyone's getting good sleep, right? But for other little ones, they might be using certain things that have now become quite accustomed. And when people say like, no, but it's a must, it's not saying that they don't need that connection. Of course they need connection, and they're going to have attachment and connection, all those things. But often sleep habits just come down to what they've learned to associate with sleep. What has happened time and time again to get them to sleep? That is why for some it's one thing and for others it's the other. It's not about the attachment side of things in those moments. It is about what they've learned, 1 + 1 equals. That is why if you guys have ever tried not to feed or to send your partner in instead, or tried to not replace the dummy for the fifth time and tried to put a hand on and pat and shush, they're like, arching back, just so upset because they just want what they know. Now, the other thing that comes into play, so we're learning learned patterns of association and reliance, right? It essentially is the 1 + 1 equals. The brain is essentially so like it's what it's supposed to do, right? Because that's what brings survival. The brain's first thing is to essentially connect with caregiver, so mum, or dad, but essentially it's usually mum, obviously with the feeding in that early stage, um, because connection is their life source. And so then what happens from there is it starts to pick up on what is the patterns, what's familiar, what's safe, right? Now, remember, safety for our little one's brain doesn't necessarily mean it's what's best for us. So if you've ever tried to leave even toxic jobs, toxic relationships, anything, right? Change, it sucks. It feels really freaking uncomfortable for all of us because the brain wants what the brain knows. It doesn't matter if ultimately, even if it's killing us, like if it's smoking, like whatever it is, when you try and change what you're eating, like whatever it is, ugh, it just is like, that's why babes cry when you make changes. That's why it seems so overwhelming. It's not because the lady in that Facebook group told you that you are, your babe now thinks they're in a Russian orphanage. Absolutely not. And whenever you're working with somebody, always make sure that you're supporting still during these changes. But it's because it feels really shitty. And it's because often they're tired and it's what they do to induce X, Y, and Z to get them back off to sleep. And now we're trying to change that. And the best thing that you can do about making changes is to become a really consistent new pattern that supports your baby to sleep but doesn't fix them to sleep, right? So what that looks like is that if you imagine anything else for your babe, you know what, babe, like this just isn't working for us, like, and it might be anything, right? When you first drop your little one at kindy, and you kind of think with a baby it's going to feel different to a top, I can assure you that if my kids have emotions, big emotions now, like it's still like, oh, if your little one was to first go to daycare or kindy, we've got to remember that our babes get to have guidance on breastfeeding. They get to adjust to daycare. They get to adjust to X, Y, and Z, right? Sleep is like just one more thing to adjust to. But it's kind of been picked on. It's kind of been like, no, like that's the one thing that we can't make change to, right? Or that's the one thing that we can't, seek guidance on, or we can't adapt to. Because whilst it's really nice to say, but in the caveman days, well, firstly, we didn't have bedrooms. We didn't have like the setups that we have now. But also we had villages, we had communities, we had there was many other, families living together, like all the things, right? That essentially enabled that mum to stay afloat if, babe was bed sharing. But we also don't know, was it that they would, for example, one auntie or whatever would take babe for a period of, like, there's so much to it, but we adapt and we evolve and we go, right, let's, this is, a way we can still be connected, attached, but we can create some healthy sleep habits for our little ones. And we see babies thrive. And if anything, we see parental like relationships thrive. We see maternal mental health, pick up majorly. Bond between mother babe, breastfeeding goes for longer, like all the things, less medicating, happier families, happier, more content babes. And it's pretty magic. And so when you think of the brain as like a canvas of like, yep, it needs that connection, it needs that attachment, but we're not threatening that. We're still going to give them that at every single point along the way. But then what you're doing is going, right, we see that but it's just now picking up patterns. It just wants a bit of familiar and a bit of safety. That's really important to keep in mind. It doesn't say, the brain isn't one saying like, you must sleep with me and feed me 10 times a night in order for me to feel that you are there for me and that this is what attachment is like, is the end. It's not like that, right? It's the patterns. So that's why for some babes, co-sleeping isn't even a thing. And we don't question when a mum has to get up and pat 6 times a night, are they attached enough? It's like, as long as you're being tortured, then you're like, you're attached and we're good. It's really not the case. We know that there are no studies that would actually say that supportive sleep habits have any detrimental effect. And these things are important. They are empowering things. So we want to make sure we look at sleep as a whole. We want to make sure we look at that lead up to bedtime. We want to make sure we recognize what the patterns are. If your little one is used to feeding to sleep or near sleep, we need to move it away from sleep and do the feed about 40 minutes before bed. Make sure it's not dragging on and make sure our little one's really engaged and wide awake in the lead up to bedtime, and especially on that feed. Because the next thing is neural pathways. If you keep feeding your little one to drowsy at points in the day, the feed 45 minutes before bed, guess which pattern you keep conditioning, right? Is that one. And then you say at 2 a.m., nah, I'm not doing that. Well, their brain, that pathway is still super strong because all day you've been conditioning that. And the one before bed, you also condition it. So what we want to do is instead, we want to make sure that we're moving it away, keeping our babe. So we're dropping that pattern of this equals this. Same with if you're going to be offering comfort to our little ones. So at any points, if you're offering comfort when you're making changes, you want to make sure essentially that with the comfort that you're offering, you're not going back to the like cutting to sleep. And that's what they used to use, right? You want to make sure you're mixing it up a little bit. So at any point you can mix it up. Now, what will happen is if you can create a perfect lead up to, like a good lead up to bedtime, doesn't mean perfect as in they're not overtired or things like that, because sometimes the days don't line up. But if you can create a new pattern of familiar, right, for your little ones, whilst supporting them, it transforms. So if we were to do a kindy drop off and you were to drop your little one off and be like, I love you, puppy. I know it feels hard, but I'll be back soon and we're going to get through our day. And this afternoon we'll do this. And I've got you. I love you. And I'll see you so soon. Big kiss and off they go. And then you leave. And the first day it's like, it's all out. It is hard. Or the first day, sometimes they don't even have it really click. And then this next day they're like, what? Like you leave me for that long? Like this is what happens. And then they have their big feelings around it. Now, imagine if, and we're going to think about this in terms of changing sleep habits. Then the next day you go, I'll drop you off for 2 minutes and then I'm going to panic and I'm going to come back and pick you up. Or dad's going to go in and do something totally different at kindy drop off just to see if that helps. Or, I'm going to do this and that. Or one time I'm going to leave you there for an hour and then come, like all these things, right? Your little ones are not going to develop a new sense of familiar predictability, which equals safety for them, which is what they're looking for, whilst being able to essentially support them. But if you continue to do this, I know, baby, you go have a good day. Remember, mommy came back yesterday and it's all okay. I'm your sturdy leader and I've got this and we're all good. So you're not saying that necessarily, but you're being that. That is what we want when we're making sleep changes. That is what our little ones are able to get a hold of. And that is the things that make change so, 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 so great, right? So we're essentially looking at that lead up to bedtime. That's really, really important as well. And then basically from there, what you want to do is you're choosing sort of how you want to make changes. So if your little one is from 4.5 months-ish up to about 12 months, one feed a night, I was just like blank then, one feed a night, I had to think, is okay in the second half of the night. So one feed anytime from 12:31 is no worries in that second half of the night. If your little one is between 3 to 4 months, you might still do 2 feeds 4 hours apart. If your little one is now above 12 months, you could be confident pretty much to drop night feeds. What I want you guys to do is to recognize that the earlier the night feed happens, the earlier either the next feed is going to come or the earlier the waking. So if your little one is 4.5 months and above or 5 months and above, we really want to get that first feed after sort of 12:31 if we can, or around that time if we can, which would mean doing some resettles before that, or if they've already had a feed at 2 a.m. and they wake again at 4 a.m., it's doing a resettle at that 4 a.m., for example. Anytime from 5:30 a.m. once they're up, they're up. From there. So if it's if you're sort of looking at that bedtime period. Now, in terms of methods, so how we go about this, in our programs, we literally indicate like you do this, 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 and this. What I'm going to say is that I want you to pay particular attention to things that make your little one better or worse. That lead up to bedtime matters. A lot of people say, I've tried everything. I want you to remember that we've just learned a whole lot about the lead ups that really matter. Not only that, but we've learned a whole lot about how we need to guide, how we're the sturdy leaders during this change process. And that confidence really matters. When it comes to the actual methods, you can either do in-room methods and weaning away really slowly, which might mean some hands-on or a lot of hands-on, especially on the first couple of nights. You always begin at the beginning of the night time. Then it might mean that night two, you're sort of backing just that little bit off of the physical consistently, but you might just do some verbal with physical every minute, for example, where you're adding that pad or that stroke. Two things. I want you to pay attention to what makes your little one better or worse, not what you think is better or worse. For a lot of babes, they get real pissed off when you're there doing physical and you're not doing what they're used to, which is the pickup, right? And then doing X, Y, Z. Some of you guys might find sorry, so that's one thing. The other thing is that I want you to pay particular attention to, firstly, sorry, what makes it better or worse? And the next thing is slipped my mind, which I will come back to. I'll come back to it. But the next thing is that if you want to wean, so some people are like, I'm rocking, I'm feeding, I've got the dummy, should I wean things? Yes, you can. Especially if you're using a snoo, you might want to just turn the rocking down for a little while. If your little one is using a dummy and you know that that's a big impact with their sleep, which to be honest, most time if they are having poor sleep and they do use a dummy, it is. Basically what you want to do then in that case is is essentially get rid of the dummy, for example, but you could keep feeding to sleep or rocking to sleep for a couple of days. And then when they've adjusted to no dummy, then you can get rid of that. So importantly, with a wean, the idea of a wean is to lessen your props without too much upset at all. If your little one is upset during these lessening of things, really upset, you may as well not wean. You may as well go into a really hands-on sort of slow settle. Because the weaning idea is not that you have like 3 really hard days and you've got rid of one thing, and then you have another 3 really hard days and you got rid of the next, and then you have another, like that's a nightmare. And so, yeah, so we don't want to do that. Then, but if you can, great. Then what we want to do is pay attention to essentially making sure that we do the hands-on and we're doing verbal, physical. That was what I was going to say. You also want to make sure you don't swap your props. So to begin with, when you're doing really hands-on sort of comforting, you want to make sure that you're firstly paying attention. A lot of the time, just sitting there next to the cot or just doing a shh, 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 really confidently. And like, when I say strongly, I mean like, yeah, just solid. So they're really feeling it. And a pat on the mattress. Sometimes just that is better, or just doing the shush, or just humming a really boring sort of tune over and over is way more effective in terms of less crying. And so, but then we want to make sure that we're trying to mix things up a little bit, especially when we're starting to get to night 2 and 3. We want to make sure that we're doing not just a pat, we're doing a bit of a stroke, we're starting to move away. Now, a lot of people say, but it's not fixing them anymore. Like it's not fixing in that moment. You're not there to fix, you're there to support. You're there to be like, I'm here, babe. You can do a pick up and cuddle if they're really upset, popping them down, paying attention to what's better or worse, and the lead ups to bedtime. So when you do your weaning, you really want to make sure you're out sort of within 4 to 5 days. Now, if you go, no, you know what, they're in their own bed now, it's working quite well, really happy to be there for the whole beginning of the night. Absolutely. And we would say to our clients, like, what's your goals here? Like, and when I say goals, like, what works for you guys? What works for you guys as a family? And they might be like, listen, like they're about to start daycare. I can't keep feeding off to sleep, or no, I can't do the rocking, and things like that. And so I'm just about to work with, I just had a dad reach out who's like, we've got a 2-year-old and I can't keep rocking this 2-year-old, like our 2-year-old to sleep. Like it's too much now. And you could imagine, right? Like that's a lot on your back, and, it gets tiring and it really does get quite wearing. And what I know to be true is that when bedtimes become quite an angsty, frustrated place, it tends to spiral if it's not nipped in the bud when you get toddlers, right? And we don't want yucky, icky bedtimes before any bedtime with little ones, but particularly with toddlers when they start to have that whole like, that they're like giving back that same energy that we're, putting off. And when they're really young, you tend to be able to just sort of, grin and bear it because you're like, oh, they're only a babe, but it's really, really important. So the next thing is that with that, we want to move away eventually, or you can reassess and go, no, I'm happy with that. Or some people say, I don't find being in a room, like it just doesn't work for us. I have another toddler, or I just tend to find it makes them so much worse. My keys with anything that's spaced is that you don't have to space long. You might be stepping out for a minute at a time. No worries. We have literally such supportive hands-on processes that if you find a minute is it, a minute or two, no worries. I would again look at, is me going in so frequently actually a bit more disruptive? Or are they doing okay with it? When you go in, really important, you want to mix up between some verbal and some physical, that sort of thing. Mixing it up a little bit can really help during those settles. Now, then what you want to do is essentially support by these means, offering more comfort if you need to at any points, and then reapplying the same thing for during the nighttime and during the day naps. When it comes to day naps, I would sort of try for around half an hour. If they're not settling, I get your babe up for about 10 minutes for a little play and then try again for 10 to 15. If they still don't settle, use the car pram or carrier. Now, if you have a little one who doesn't settle, then you need to then look at, okay, was it their feed before bedtime, their nap? Did their feed fall too close? All the sleep pressure things. Are they just, wanting more awake time? Or is this just day one and, they just need a little bit of, help? You should be noticing changes and them starting to adjust and less crying within a few days, right? So really, if you're not getting that, then definitely reach out because it might be that, there's something else that's impacting the settles or their ability to settle and things like that. When you do the feed during the night, just gentle talk and touch and then pop your baby back down again. Okay. Now, a lot of people get caught up in cat naps and how do I do it? Like, honestly, guys, the biggest thing with cat napping is that here, I'm going to show you. Now, when little ones are able to settle themselves off to sleep, they fall asleep. Everything, when they come into this first sleep cycle awakening, everything, if they've self-settled, is as it was when they fell asleep, right? It's still the same when they come into that awakened point. Babies who are in lighter surfaces of sleep because they don't have the best ability to get into their deep sleep, they use a dummy that keeps them on lighter surface sleep. They've gone to bed overtired. They don't relax. Like they're so aware of their externals. They know if the breast moves. They know that, like that, just that sleeping with one eye open. What happens is they come to these awaken points. They have to call out for you to come in. By the time you come in, it's ruined, right? Like they're not getting back off to sleep again. With little ones who are able to get into these really deep rhythmic sleeps, they're more likely to stay and they'll drift between sleep cycles, but they won't fully come to that awakened point in between their sleep cycles. That is what we want for catnapping. And even if they do come to a bit more of an awakened point, they're able to recognize that everything is as it was when they fell asleep, and so they can go back off to sleep again because nothing's changed, so nothing's missing. But also they know how to. They know how to drift back off to sleep. So they're more likely to get into these deeper, beautiful rhythms of sleep, and they also know how to get back off to sleep should they come into that more lightened awake point to know. By the time that your little ones are sort of 4 or 5 months or and over, if not younger, by the time that they come out of one sleep cycle in the early hours of the morning or from a cat nap, if they don't know how to get back off or they have to call out for you and wait for you and then you have to go in and do X, Y, and Z, usually it's really hard to get them back off to sleep then. So teaching them that is so, so amazing for that. So during the day, so you'd always start beginning of the nighttime, then run through all the way through the nighttime into that next day, working with your nighttime resettles and then going essentially with your daytime resettles from there. I love the use of, using a sleeping bag. I would sort of say that if your little ones are 4 months and under, of course, you could have them still swaddled. But 4 to 4.5 months and over, I would have my little ones with their arms out and into their sleep space with a sleeping bag. And I love the use of some white noise on low, particularly if you've got, external factors coming into play and that sort of thing. That's going to be really, really important for our babes. So in terms of how we can approach those settles, it can be either really hands-on. You can do weaning first, and then you can do really hands-on patting, shushing, then just moving back a little bit, and then still doing the verbals, but trying to just space a little bit the physical, but still being completely in the room. Then you will eventually need to move to out of the room, or you can begin with popping your little babe down, and then stepping out, and then moving, into more of that space, sort of checking and things like that. Now, when it comes to toddlers, what we want to do essentially is have I love the idea of a little stamp chart in the lead up to bedtime that has like brush teeth, get their pajamas on, that sort of thing. You want to make sure with toddlers they haven't lost sleep pressure by screen time. By sitting back in their little chairs with their little sippy cup of milk, and then they ditch their milk, they jump up and they're like, like off we go. That will give massive second winds, which we don't want our toddlers to get. We want to make sure that they haven't had like their day nap isn't too crazy where then they're not able to have, a reasonable bedtime. And it might come down to, okay, we've checked this sleep pressure, we've checked the lead up, we've checked that they're not just running the show and just doing a million boundary pushes. And now we actually need to start capping that nap. But the other thing with toddlers is that a stamp chart in the lead up to bedtime, it gives them a sense of control whilst you're able to refer back to to those things and say, no, sweetie, we've already had this or that. It's time for bed, because that is really, really important. And what usually tends to happen from about 18 months onwards is firstly at around 2, your little ones would become really age appropriate to need their door open a little bit and a light on outside of their room, right? But what tends to happen with our toddlers is that they tend to start to try and want to take control of the lead up to bedtime. They want to, push this boundary, push that boundary. They don't enjoy separation, and that is absolutely okay that they don't enjoy it. It doesn't mean that it's not going to happen or it should never happen. It means that we, as their sturdy leaders, show them how confident we are that they can handle that moment of going off to bed and know that we're going to come back tomorrow and become really comfortable and confident in that. Isn't that amazing that we can show our little ones that we can actually be such sturdy leaders and be the people that show them that these things are okay? And they get to not only have that confidence, but they get to reap the benefits of having beautiful sleep. So we check that lead up. And then in terms of boundaries, whenever it comes to toddlers, I always say their feelings around the lead up to bedtime, their big feelings in general, tantrums, whatever you want to call it, are totally valid to them, even if it's over something so, so ridiculous. And they are allowed to have them, but it doesn't mean our boundaries change. What I feel like has happened is we've gone from really authoritative parenting to a lot of the time, not always, passive parenting, where the parents are just like, oh, like they're totally running the show. Like I'm actually scared of them. Like I actually feel like I get this knot in my stomach as soon as I start to hear them getting worked up. Now, for all my younger babe parents, this is really important because you guys are going to avoid a lot of pain by paying attention to some of these things. So firstly, are they just ready for more awake time, sleep pressure, what's happening in their lead up to bedtime? The stamp chart's a great idea. And then really looking at those boundaries. They can have their big feelings because you won't give another glass of milk. They can have their big feelings because you've already read 3 books. Really important that you define to them, okay, let's put 2 books on the sticker chart or 3, but the more you reach out to them to lead it, so the more they're like, no, I want this, I don't want that, yeah, I want this. What that does is that puts them in charge of driving the car. And then we say to them, if they've been driving the car all day, right? They're too young. They're like, oh, I guess I've got it. Like, oh. And so they're going to hold on to that, right? Because they can't lean on you. They can't, where are you in the back of the car? Like, you're in the back seat. Oh gosh, I've got to do it now. Like I've got this whole responsibility of this whole thing on me because I tried pushing some buttons because I kind of wanted to drive for a bit, but then the door actually opened to be able to drive. Now I'm in the driver's seat and I'm like freaking out. And so I'm going to do whatever I can control this situation even more, which is when the requests start to spiral more, which is when the meltdown, the big feelings become more because it's overwhelm, it's angst, it's all these things, right? So imagine though, if your little ones are able to drive and then at nighttime, you're like, right, now I had enough now, bedtime. I'm going to tell you what to do. We want to make sure that the lead up to bedtime is essentially us connect to direct, right? It is with essentially what we really want to recognize is that the more relationship that we have with them in that lead up to bedtime, the less pushback we're gonna have. The more that instead of just from the kitchen or somewhere else, we can be shouting out to a little ones like, quick, get and brush your teeth. Like, remember, they're tired now. They had enough too. But then we go, or they've just had their milk and they've had a huge second wind, and then we go and put in four directions for them to do, four tasks for them to do, and then go and guess what the beauty of the end of it is? You get to go to bed. What toddler? I mean, that doesn't even sound amazing to me. Like if somebody said to me like, well, I don't know, maybe these days I wouldn't mind doing a few things to get to bed, but you know what I'm saying. For a toddler, they're not like, oh, the benefits of bed are so great. And I can, have it anytime. Like they literally are like, no thanks. So it is really important that we start to get down and play with them before. And this is really important, guys, from like 15 months onwards, that we're playing with them before, just connecting, finding moments of saturation, Because if we don't fill their cups in the lead up to bedtime, they will ask us to fill it at bedtime. So we've filled up their cups. We're finding those moments. We're breaking the bedtime routine up a little bit, mixing it up, making it a little bit fun, putting on a little bit of music and dancing to the brush our teeth or, whatever it is, breaking it up where they shower when they first get home and then we do dinner for once, and so it's not just one thing into the next, and then they get the reward of going to bed, because we can all see how unappealing that is. But essentially making sure that then we're able to allow all their big emotions out, but with the boundary still staying. I know that you want more milk. It's not happening, sweetie. And I know it feels really yuck and it feels or really frustrating. And I know I recognize that that is what you want. And you can feel frustrated like that. I know that would suck, but you're not getting more milk. And then you them let it out, and not with the whole like, then you need to go to your room. Like, and also not letting it out with you looking at them being like, oh my God, what the heck? Like, this is ridiculous. Like, because they are their own feelings at that point, right? And so we want to make sure that they let it out. We want to make sure that we're then able to show them that their big feelings don't scare us, that we're able to hold space for those big feelings, that we're able to sit on the bus with them during those big feelings, but that we're also able to absolutely hold a boundary and keep steering the car ourselves. Because imagine if you're going to make changes to the little one's sleep from 18 months and above, and you go on with the attitude of like, should I drive? Oh, okay, I guess I'll do this and I'll try going this way. Like, do you reckon go this way? Like, nah, you need to come in with your babes and your little babies too. Mama or dad's got this. Let's do this, bub. I know it's going to feel a bit yuck, even baby, 5 months, 6, whatever, right? I know, Bubby, we're going to make some changes tonight, but it's all going to be okay. Imagine if you try and make changes, you're like, like, I don't know what and so we want to have that confidence because they are going to be able to pick up on that and they're going to feed off that. They're going to essentially mimic our energies. And so we want to make sure that we have that confidence. And that's really important when it comes to our toddlers too. So I am going to take this last 15 to get